as he mentioned, this is, what I call the operations on the narrow gauge for the WW&F, or actually how I operate my ON30 version of it. So I kind of developed this clinic to present at this past narrow gauge convention in Denver. It was pretty well received, even though most of those people are wide 3-foot gaugers, 2-footers that most of us are. As my layout's been inspired. And by the way, I hate Zoom clinics that shut everybody off from conversation. Every question, ask. Okay, I'd like to do my clinics live. I've done some of these where they hold all questions to the end. So I have something to speak up. My layout is inspired by the WW&F as it operated around 1925. And it's built in ON30. It fits into a 10-foot by 12-foot spare bedroom in my home near Houston, Texas. When I moved down here in 2012, I laid out some layout goals. One, to build a layout based on the WW&F in ON30 to take advantage of those Bachman fornies that were available. I purchased one back in 2011, and I gave up my N-scale layout within hours after I purchased it. I wanted to scratch build as many models as possible using all these great books that Gary and Chris and others have put together, Peter Barney, all these plans and information. I'm a modeler with a layout. But I also wanted to include some form of operations. I want to base it on what how the prototype did it. So for those of you who may not be familiar, the people up in Colorado certainly weren't. To give you a quick, brief history, town leaders of Wiscasset, Maine wanted to build a railroad to connect their seaport to Canada, to Quebec specifically. They wound up chartering the railroad in 1854, and it became known as Wiscasset in Quebec. It had other names before that. 40 years later, they started construction using 2-foot gauge, which was very popular at the time in Maine. And here's a track map I lifted from the WW&F museum site. You can see they built from Wiscasset along the waterfront north, up through all these towns: Whitefield, Cooper's Mills, China, Albion, and they got to Burnham Junction. And there they ran into a roadblock. The standard gauge railroad, which became known as the Maine Central, refused to let them build a crossing at grade at that junction to let them move on. After a brief court battle, they lost, and so they abandoned the line back to Albion, which was about milepost 40. Well, the railroad wasn't going to give up that easy, so they decided to build a line northwest from Y and Weeks Mills. They got to Winslow on the eastern side of the Kennebec River. The plan was to build a bridge across into Waterville and extension on into Farmington and connect with that other little railroad called the Sadie River and something like that. Well, once again, during that, apparently they gave up the idea of actually getting to Quebec, so they reorganized and rebranded themselves as the Wiscasset, Waterville, and Farmington Railroad. Once again, the Maine Central became a problem and basically refused to let them have some key land, I guess, over on the Waterville side. They lost that battle. They gave up. They ran out of money, which is always a problem. And they wound up abandoning the idea of going on to Farmington, and they stayed in Winslow. So, but they did secure a contract with American Woolen Mills in North Vassalboro to haul some Pennsylvania coal up from Wiscasset up into the power plant in American Woolen Mills. Along the line, they did lose that contract. They also ran out of money, it sounds like, and reorganized, and they dropped the railroad and renamed themselves Railway. They kind of like a lot of companies I know, you don't fix the problem, you just rebrand and rename yourself. Eventually, that line to when on the left side, it kind of dried up. So they abandoned the line back to the Weeks Mills Y. And so we were back to the original 40 miles they originally had. And this is how the railroad looked in 1925. So here's the 40 miles in my 10-foot by 12-foot spare bedroom and O scale. So I was able to put Wiscasset along the top and 12-foot and around about a 6-foot length before it got to the door. Albion's along the 12-foot roll along the wall along the bottom, and this 6-foot area across the window represents the other 40 miles in between. So some notes about it. I used Digitrax DCC. I had it in my N-scale days, long before engines were DC compatible. All my locomotives have soundtrack sound decoders. In fact, here's 2 of them in the Wiscasset engine house, number 4 and number 7. Number 3 is not in this picture. The track's hand laid using microengineering code 83 rail on basswood ties, and everything's about 57 inches above the floor. All turnouts are hand built using Fast Track's jig and hand thrown with either caboose throws or blue point throws connected to knobs in the fascia. I don't know if you're familiar with blue points. They operate like tortoise machines, but without the electricity. So my goals for setting up operations for the layout were to use all this historical data that's research available to mimic the movements of the trains in the prototype. I mean, I've worn out the Gary and Chris's books, but and all the other books I've collected over the years and pour through them. I wanted to create a system that would simulate the way the people and the freight moved along the prototype railroad and have fun. I've been to a lot of operating sessions with some of these big ass Texas layouts down here. I don't know how much fun they have when they yell at each other. So I just want to be laid back, kind of like this railroad, and just have some fun. Some of the challenges on my layout of developing operations were I have 2 towns separated by 6 feet. I have a runaround at each end, but there's no real yard. I only have about a dozen freight cars and a few online industries. Actually, I have 13 cars on the railroad, freight cars. I have to take one of them off because there's not enough room. There's no direct connection with another railroad and no staging. All this goes against everything to tell you in operations on how to operate a railroad. So I take a very simplistic view of operations. I break it into 2 categories: moving trains, moving cars. So regarding moving trains, look at what the prototype did in moving trains. So here's their public schedule of arrangement of train service from 1924, a year, a few months before I would have been operating. And you can see the towns that I have: Albion at the top, Wiscasset at the bottom, and actually I have a Prebbles milk stop. I was able to squeeze in on that 6-foot section. So 3 days a week, they ran 2 round trips a day, starting in the morning from Albion to Wiscasset, turning around and going back to Albion. You can see them in the afternoon, they're heading back to Wiscasset, and then the last train pulls in around 6 p.m. You'll notice there's an overlap here on those last 2 trains. It looks like trains 2 and 11 scheduled to meet somewhere around Whitefield, around 4:10. I didn't model Whitefield, so that was a problem. Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday and Sunday, they ran 2 round trips, 1 in the morning, the last one of the day. So for me, I just run them sequentially. Since I didn't have a place to those 2 trains to meet, you'll run them back and forth. And I could run 1 or 2 round trips, depending on how long I want to operate. I also wanted to consider the moving of people, because in this day, there weren't many roads. So the folks kind of depended on the railroad to travel up and down the valley. So I do have 4 passenger stops, believe it or not, on this little railroad, starting with Albion, the 2-story station in Albion along Benton Road. You see they get ready to head out in the morning. I have this flag stop or milk stop. That's one of Gary's kits for Prebbles. Here's the main station of Wiscasset. This is a scratch built from plans from west. You can see to catch the main central, you just walk to the left on the boardwalk, the main central depot over there. And I built this pier station, and there's a lot of discussions about what it was used. And in my world, I'm still running passenger steamships to the railroad wharf, even though they weren't doing this in 1925. And there's a lot of discussions what the pier station was used for, but I use it to allow folks to transfer between the steamship service and the railroad. So I'll move by coach or whatever on there to pick up folks. Speaking of that, the railroad actually, it surprised me during all this that they actually, a 40-mile railroad had a RPO combine they ran. Well, you really need a mail car on a 40-mile, but so I have one of these Deerfield River Laser kit alterations to one of the Bachman cars. I've actually got the coach now done. I've narrowed it. I put a sound car in here, a Tsunami sound decoder in here to control the lights and everything, and it adds a little sound when you want it to. And I've actually modeled the Orbis Bonnie, the mail clerk who served. He's inside the mailroom there. My train consist is limited to a locomotive, a passenger car, and up to 3 freight cars. This is typically what they look like. This is only 2 cars with a combine, but this is typically what it. You can add another car, but you can see it takes up pretty much that whole area. So with moving trains, okay, it was, how about moving cars? So moving cars is obviously car forwarding. And I had 2 challenges when I was thinking about how to develop this I needed to take care of. Was there enough freight traffic between these 2 towns to give me any type of realistic operation? And if so, what car forwarding system could I use to create something realistic of moving traffic? So as far as enough freight car, I use all the books available, the Gary and Chris books, as well as 2 Feet of Tidewater and everything. And I sat at my desk for many, many days, and I pulled up a spreadsheet and I started documenting quotes of things that were moved and the industry type from general, coal, lumber. I have pages and pages of this, of what was moved, and especially between the 2 towns. Then I took that and I kind of listed, all right, what's moving from Albion to Wiscasset? So you have cream, milk and cream, potatoes, canned vegetables, a lot of sawn lumber, tan hides. The tannery was closed by 1925, but I kept it anyway, and hay, and there were other things as well. On the return from Wiscasset to Albion, you've got untanned hides, coal still moving around, and fertilizer ag products. There's a lot of other things I've found since then, but this told me, well, there was enough to probably to move some stuff. So here's the Turner Dairy Ramp in Albion. You'll notice those aren't the right milk cans, Gary. I know you've produced these a couple times in the past. I have them, but when I shot this picture, I was originally going to have that dairy car with the operating doors. That was a major fail. So when I got done shooting some photos, I closed the door up. So I can't really duplicate this anymore. I've got the potato warehouse in Albion. This is I moved it to the other end of Albion, and I had to shorten it a little bit. You'll notice there's a stovepipe on the left. They had a little stove in there to keep the potatoes freezing in the winter. Sawn lumber or box boards. This was the major commodity used by the railroad. The strange thing is there were no real sawmills located on the line. They were all offline, so all the lumber would be moved by wagon or truck, stacked along the right of way till it dried, and then you get these 4 guys moving lumber onto the flat cars to be shipped down to Wiscasset. Portland Cannery had an operation up there in Albion. This is, my poor representation of a flat, building flat. This is 3 inches. It's on the wrong side of the track. I know that, but I could put it against the wall. This is behind the door, so there's only 3 inches from the front to the back. So gives me a great place to spot a couple of cars. Coal was still being moved either for their own locomotives or for offline customers where it could be shoveled onto like the back of a truck. This is an Albion still. This is the scene that really got me wanting to build the railroad to begin with, the waterfront in Wiscasset. I built, these are deep flats of the Wiscasset grain, lumber, and the Turner Creamery. I didn't have room for the other building on the other side of the road. I got the drawings from Peter Barney years ago, and the ones he used to build the scene in the dairy car at the museum. But I had to build these as deep flats because I didn't have enough. The coal shed on the wharf, by 1925, this was gone. But because they weren't supplying the American woolen mills anymore. But when I mocked the scene up, it just looked so cool. I thought, well, I got to put it on there and leave it. So I moved the time around a little bit. So coal would have been brought in by ship, loaded into these, lowered into this bucket into the hold, would be shoveled in there apparently, then dumped into these little hand carts on the tramway, and then wheeled into the peak end of this coal shed and dumped on either side. And then on the back side of this, there would have been a spur leading into that. I modeled that as an abandoned spur because I didn't really have room. And then you got lumber, loading lumber onto a schooner. So this is a scratch-built schooner I did years ago, back in 2018. And then finally, you got the transfer yard in Wiscasset. So when I built this, I made a mistake. I didn't realize until it was too late that the narrow gauge track should have been elevated so that the doors matched, I think. But by the time I realized it was too late. This is a dummy track, and that's Gary. This one other one of your kits you offered for a while. I've never put any good wheels or trucks on it yet. Every time I looked at it, I don't want to spend like $100 for a dummy set of trucks and wheels. So that told me there was enough freight traffic. So then, what about car forwarding? On this layout. So once again, I have some difficulties with freight car forwarding because cars aren't interchanged directly with any other railroads. Cars don't enter or leave the layout unless I pick them up on my hands. There's no staging. There's only enough room for about 12 freight cars on the layout. So car forwarding, I've tried this off and on for years. And my first go around when I started an N scale, I used a system called tab on car. You have a thumbtack or an H beam, and you make it a color and a letter, and it tells you where to go. And I used to spend a lot of time super detailing some of these N scale cars, and then I booger it up by putting the thumbtack in the groove. But that just bothered me. Couldn't stand the way it looked. Eventually, as my N scale layout grew, I moved on to these 4-cycle cards. I bought a whole kit thing from Micromark, the boxes, all the cards and everything. And at one point, my N scale layout had about 120, 130 cars, 25 engines. I had a 6-foot long auto assembly plant on one wall, getting 40 to 50 cars a day. So 4-cycle cards worked really well. But when I tried to look at it for this, it was going to be too repetitive, moving the same car back and forth between 1 and 2 places. So I rejected that idea. Another one I've seen are computer generated switch lists. I've operated on a lot of layouts where you walk in, they hand you the sheet. First of all, I'm looking at all this data in front of me, just like overwhelming, all the stuff I've got to do. And at the end of the day, I'm always finding out that I probably didn't get all the cars where they belong, but the computer assumes that the car in the correct location. So then whoever owns the layout's got to go back and fix all the mistakes. But all these car forwarding systems seem only to be concerned with moving the car. In fact, I've heard folks say, "Oh, I don't care what's in the car." Well, after all this research, I thought it was kind of a missed opportunity to kind of immerse yourself in that process of what are you moving. I wanted a system that included that business, the transactional business of moving products. Until I retired, I spent 50 years in sales and marketing for manufacturers who made stuff that other people would build stuff with, industrial products. So I wanted, in that world, someone wants a product and they order it. So your business makes the product, and then someone, in this case, our case here, a railroad moves the product. So I wanted to, simulate that on my railroad. So this is how I thought, how would it work? So you got this potato warehouse in Albion. got an order for a load of potatoes. It needs to go to someplace in Boston. Well, the narrow gauge doesn't go to Boston, so it just needs to get it from Albion to the transfer yard in Wiscasset, or it can be moved on to the Maine Central. Should be easy, right? So here it is here's the layout. So the potato warehouse is down here in the corner. And then you've got the Maine Central transfer yard over here. That's about 25 to 26 feet, so not that far. Take a look at it from transactional process. So here you got Albion, the potato warehouse wants to move potatoes down to Wiscasset. First thing they do, they need a boxcar. So they ask the agent in Albion for a boxcar. Local agent says, well, I don't have any empty here. So he phones his colleague down in Wiscasset and says, do you have any empty boxcars? Agent in Wiscasset says, yeah, I've got one over here in the yard. He tags it, the empty, with instructions to move the car on the next available train. And then the crew assembling a northbound adds it to their empty boxcar into their consist. They get up to Albion. Agent says, you need to get it over to the warehouse where it's loaded and goes out the next day. All that to move that little boxcar about 25 feet. So how could I simulate that type of transactional process on the layout? Well, I remember this article I read years ago on single waybills. Instead of the 4-cycle waybills, these are single waybills. So the article was called "The Case for the Single Waybill." It was by Mike White. And it was in the October 2013 Dispatcher's Office, which is the OpSig newsletter. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it, but so Mike's waybill system looks like it could eliminate that repetitiveness of that 4-cycle system. So first thing I want to do is see if I could adapt all those micronite cards that I bought. I had plenty of them. So using what I got, I've got filled out all these car cards. I don't know if anybody used these things. You fold them up and you can see the little tape job on the lower part. You make little notes here on what to do. The red with the Combine 2 tells me there's a decoder in it, so there's some things I need to do about turning lights on, etc. Otherwise, it's just a card. It came with these cool gray locomotive cards, so I used 3 of them for my 3 locomotives. I wound up, penciling in the decoder functions on the bottom or the grade crossing whistle signals and all that stuff. I wasn't consistent. It shows one on the one side, one on the other, so it's all there. Then I decided to create these train cards. So I printed these things. I did this on Excel, printed this out on this green card stock I have, and then and cut them out. So I have one for each of those 4 scheduled trains during the day. I also created 2 for each of the locomotives as extras, one north, one south, so that they could run extras if I need to. And then to run a train, you simply put the train card into the locomotive. Now you got orders to move. Now the waybills, I also did this in Excel as well. So I created these single waybills. There's a little closer look. I blew it up here. You see here we're going to move canned peas and corn from a Portland cannery in Albion down to the Maine Central transfer. Now it's only on the top. There's only on one side. The other area is left blank. So there's only one. Each card only has one waybill. Created a bunch of these for all possibilities and all that data I had from I had. In fact, they helped me determine the ratio of shipments. So, for instance, it looks like lumber was moved most often. So most of the cards have lumber moving, so that kind of helps simulate the type of traffic that was moving as well. So then I had to deal with the empty. So I created Excel again. I printed this on blue cardstock. I bought this stack of card material from Office Depot, and I had these different colors. It was great. It's like a 10 lifetime supply. But each one, I've got an empty car order for every type of car that could wind up be needed at any one of the spots. So how's this all work? Well, I start the session. I have this deck of waybills. I give it a shuffle, face side down, so I'm not cheap. See what I'm doing. I draw about 8 to 10 cards from the stack, depending on how I feel like I want to run that day. Then I take and I sort these waybills into where they're shipping from Albion or from Wiscasset. And then so the local agent, that's me, I look for any available cars in that town that need to go, that could fulfill the waybill. If there aren't any available, then I check with the colleague, which is also me in the other town, for availability. So remember that example we did with the potatoes. So here's the waybill. Shows you're going to move potatoes from Albion to the Maine Central transfer yard. So remember that agent Wiscasset found this empty box car. It happened to be 503, a potato car. He pulls an empty car order, sticks it in the sleeve, and now that car can be moved north to Albion. So here he is, the train crew is pulling 503 from the wharf track where it was just sitting there. And now it's part of a northbound train crossing the trestle from Wiscasset. Here, engine 7 drops it off at the potato warehouse when it gets there. And when you get there, you pull out the blue card, you stick in the waybill, and now you're all set to deliver this down to the transfer. So that's how that all moved. And I was doing this, I got to thinking, what the hell do you do with the empty cars? So one of Peter Barney's books, he published these daily car reports. And I kept looking at these things, and I saw some cars sitting at the same town day after day. And I thought, and I actually reached out to Peter before he passed away. And we started email back and forth and trying to figure out, speculate what was happening. And we kind of figured out they just left them there until they're needed elsewhere or in the way. Since there's no per diem, there's no foreign road cars. If it was me, why would I move the car unless I needed it somewhere else or I need to get it out of it? So that's what I decided to do. Optional switch lists. I run on, some people like to run them with a switch list instead of a stack of cards. So I created one for each town. This is the one for Albion. So you can see down below, there's a track diagram if you get lost. There's one for Wiscasset if you're over there. When you have a small railroad, the other thing is I wanted to find a way to extend the run for the road crew without just being, everything being totally manufactured. So one of the rules in the rule book is that the locomotive has to have the water tank topped off at each end, either at the end of the run or the beginning of the run. When you enter the town or leave the town, you top off the water. So there's the Crosby tank in Albion, and then you have the water column in Wiscasset. So this spout is activated. I'll give you a little quick video. I assume you guys can hear this. If not, I can.
We can't hear it, but that's okay.
That's all right. So you pull up and you simply lower the spout. And actually, if you could hear this, you press the F6 on the decoder and it plays the water sound. When you get done, you lift it back up and then you drive off. Now, my youngest son is a electrical engineer who worked for NASA and works for Caterpillar. He worked for a lot of Anheuser-Busch. He said, Dad, I can hook you up with a Arduino and a bunch of other stuff I didn't understand. I said, this operates with a threaded rod and a string, works fine with me. I can problem solve it. So there's also the water column here in Wiscasset, and you simply can take your finger and move that around to position it over the tank. All the locomotives must be turned so the engine's pointed in the correct direction. So I have a turntable at each end. This one's in Albion. We have automatic reversing circuits that keep the polarity straight. I have the station in Prebles, and it's a flag or milk stop. So milk is an important commodity for the railroad. So I'm thinking, how would they handle it? So here we go, Prebles milk stop once again before I close the door on the dairy car. So got it labeled, and you can see I've got the car for the Turner Dairy car, number 65 right here with a waybill. It simply says deliver this to the Turner Dairy. I have taken some of these old milk cans and I attach 1, 2, 3, or 4 to clear plastic. I store them in this milk thing here. At the beginning of the session, I stick one of those things up on the platform so the train crew needs to pay attention and pick up whatever's there. They can, jot it down on this little card, picking up two. Then they stick it in with the card and carry that on with them into Wiscasset. And at the end of the day, they need to make sure they drop off. The last train of the day drops off the same number of clean cans that were brought in. I don't know how much of this really adds to everything, but I have fun with it because it reminds me of one of the reasons why we're running the damn railroad. We have this crossing of Maine Central that's protected by a ball signal. And, this is the only signal really on the whole railroad. And apparently, if there are two balls visible, then the narrow gauge has the right of way. But if only one is visible, then the standard gauge has the right of way. I use the same threaded rod and string to operate this one ball up and down. But train crews kind of have to pay attention so they don't run through the signal, because like it happened in 1913 when the Maine Central train overran the signal. And a derrick car 73 was following the diamond. Maine Central engine struck the derrick car broadside. And this became known as the milk car wreck in 1913. Now, my grandsons saw this picture from 2 feet of tidewater, where this car is all over the place. You can see the wood splinters, empty cans all over. And my grandson said, why don't we do that on this layout? And I said, well, that happened 12 years ago. What would it look like now? We spent a Saturday afternoon and we put these together. These are the remnants of the milk car wreck. It just serves a reminder as people pay attention to the ball signal. Crews need to use a brakeman when they're required. So I got an idea from a guy down here in Texas. He does it with little toy things. I used an O-scale figure, and he's holding some flags I made, and I glued him to a piece of plastic that fits between the rails. And so if you're switching, in this case, the end of the trestle, you need to make sure you're protecting the train, and make sure you need to pick him up at the end, because don't leave him behind. There are consequences, and there's really bad consequences if you run him over. My grandsons saw me do that one time, and they always remind me. Lately, I've added some situation cards. I've seen some other folks do this on their layout, and I thought, well, maybe add a little variety and a chance to add some extra trains or whatever. So I created these and printed these out on yellow cardstock. I got different scenarios that could have happened. I got a bunch of these. Most of them say none, so I'm not just having a situation every day. So the start of the session, you draw one. It tells you if you need to run an extra or something sometime during the day. Some additional tools. When I operate these card boxes I got from Micromark, I put labels on them. So this is the one near the Wiscasset Wharf. So there's a box for the Maine Central Transfer business, one for the wharf track nearest the coal shed, and one nearest the pier station. So I've got these scattered around and labeled. And this is just printed. This is just Word printed on gray cardstock stuck to a piece of wood. I painted black. I saw Lee on here, Lee Rainey. He gave a presentation in the past year or so where he made these card slots. And Lee, as soon as the presentation went over, I went and got some scraps, and I put these things together the next day. So this is a great way of keeping cards off the scenery, and yet you can see them. This is one of the coolest things that just made this some scrap. The key is that there's just enough space to get a card or two in there, wide enough you get several across there. You have to be able to see all the waybills and everything, and yet also high enough that the top of the card is above the fascia, so you're not like scraping your fingernails on trying to get it off there. So this was a great ad, and it took me about an hour or so, and it was well worth it. Fascia labels, I tell the operators where the location after all this great research that Gary and Chris and other people have. This is the town of Rebels, and there's Town Farm Road right nearby. I have Ben Road. I have little locations that tell where you're at, just not trying to model what was really going on there. Also, I have labels to identify those knobs for glue points. This is an area, these three wooden circles are the knobs to operate the controls for the Blue Point Pros. And so I just made little labels above them, tell you the name of the track and the general direction it goes. So I did this, I did this for my grandkids, but really, I can't remember what knob is what. Uncoupling picks, I do have some sound cars. I've been adding some as I go, and they need a magnet at the top. So here's my picks that I use. I use HO KT couplers, and I cut the trip pin off of them. I hate those things anyway. But I attach this at the top. There's a rare earth magnet to turn the sound car on and off, and a pick at the bottom. The great thing is that the magnet holds onto the screws that hold the fascia in place, but they all wind up in one end of the layout anyway, like they always do. I have probably about 10 of them. Every time I add something or make a change, I like to test it. How does it work? But warning to everybody out there, there were no child labor laws in 1925. So here's my test crew. That's my grandson, Lucas. He's the engineer. He's on the left there. He's got a throttle in hand, waiting for his brother, Peter, who's the conductor, brakeman, to sort through the cards and tell him what's the next move. So I figured out if they can do this, and I probably can. So how's this all working so far? Well, currently takes me about 2 hours to run those 2 full round trip trains in a session. So I'm moving about 8 cars. But if I need to stop in a session before completing all the moves, it's no big deal. It kind of self-corrects. I can go back in there an hour later, a week later, a month later, and kind of look around what cards need to be, are waiting to be delivered, and I can kind of pick it up and create a quick session as it is. Well, I did have some lessons learned so far, or I like to call changes I'd like to make. Look at the town of Albion. There was a snowplow spur located near the station. When I originally designed this thing, I thought, I don't need that track. I'm not going to have a snowplow anyway. But since then, I found it. I think I thought it'd be a great place to shove a car out of the way as I'm trying to switch cars in Albion. So when I got back from Denver, I took a look at this. Is the overhead view of the town of Albion. I used a template to mock up a turnout there, and I used some HO flex track and see what would fit. And I thought, well, that's not so bad. So I made one of the turnouts from Fast Tracks, and then I just laid the ties right over the current scenery. I didn't care. I had to move some of the cinders out of the way. And now I've got a track that I wound up building. Now I had to build a flanger and a snowplow to fit on there. I tell you, when you look down the track now, you can see the main track curves behind the that box car. You see the flanger and the snowplow off the left. Kind of makes a cool view down the length of the track. So yeah, if I'm going to operate and not have a plow and need a plow or flanger, I just pull it off and set it down. I use that. Just leave it as an extra track. Yeah, David, you going to say something?
I just said that's pretty sweet, that image right there.
Yeah, I have a friend who's a Colorado narrow gauger. He comes over and he always stands there and looks down, this light. He goes, "This is what narrow gauge is about." He's right. That long look. So you look at that potato warehouse in the background, that's about 10 feet away. So I also think about, I thought it'd be cool to add some extension of 2 tracks on the end here. One of those kinds that you put on a board and you kind of lift up or attach. I haven't done anything with it yet. It would give me a little more. Right now, I can fit an engine and 1 car on that on that lead. It'd be nice to add another 6 or 8 inches, maybe. It would be in the way of the door. I kind of mock some things up. I haven't done anything other than that yet, but I'm still thinking about that. Other than that, I'm really happy with the results. This is a fun little layout to run. I keep looking at other things I could do, but I'm just having a good time with this thing. As David mentioned, I keep adding things and taking things off, but it's so far it's been pretty good. That's it for me. Thanks for listening. Any questions? I'd be happy to take. Otherwise,
Yes, Pete,
Yeah.
when you deliver the empty box car to the potato warehouse,
yeah.
would you fill it in the same session or would it have to sit a day?
Yeah. I usually give it a day. My kind of rule is I just leave anything needs to be loaded takes a day.
Yeah.
So you have this backup of cars always that are sitting there. So that's why I may pull less than 8 or 10 cars if I'm got one ongoing from day to day because I got cars left over from the previous day. But you can do whatever you want, but
Yeah.
if I'm impatient or if I have space on the train, usually I don't have space on the train either. So I may want to leave it there a little longer.
And what is your number 3 made from? Is that the Bachman forny?
Yeah. Yeah, I shortened it a lot. Yeah, that's the with 18-ton Portland forny.
There was one article in the Narrow Gauge Gazette on that, right? Maybe it's not.
No, it's actually, I think it was an OM30 annual.
Okay.
Chris, I did the number 4, which wasn't really shortened. I just took the 4 is still a large locomotive, and it just doesn't have the lead truck, so I shortened the front, the pilot by about, I don't know, inch and a half. But on the number 3, I actually had to cut the frame and shortened it. Scary moment to cut the frame on an out of production locomotive.
Well, this is John Rogers. I just want to say it's a gorgeous railroad.
Well, thank you.
And if you're interested in pursuing any more of the waybill issue, I'd recommend you contact Jim Providenza. He has a great, let me just see if I can. He has a really great clinic he gave on the waybill system that they're using at the Central Vermont Railroad in California.
Okay.
That tells you a lot about how they sourced actual waybills, and to me it's a little over the top, but on the other hand, it's very prototypical.
That's the thing, though. I didn't want to go too far over the top. I mean, there are rabbit holes you can go down in this hobby, as y'all know, that are hard to get back from. And actually, I'm looking at 3D printing something here. My son has a 3D printer, and if this works, I'm thinking, oh my God, what is this going to open up? So we'll see.
Your one directional waybills or single rotation waybills is a lot along the way I've been thinking about doing the Sandy River and Rangeley Lakes here. So even a bigger railroad can work much the same way. What's interesting is, for instance, in the Sandy River and Rangeley Lakes, when something comes down to Farmington, it needs to get out of Farmington if it's empty. So there was a lot of racks that came to Farmington. So they need when empty, go back to Phillips or go back to something. So what you're doing is very appropriate, but a lot of that stuff, when a car got up to Rangeley, I'm sure it just stayed in Rangeley until it was needed somewhere along that line, right? It stayed wherever. And it was just Farmington was probably a unique situation, I would think, because of how small it was and how much everything came there. So mine will be slightly different, but it'll be very much the same.
Yeah, I mean, the Sandy River, some of these layouts I've seen you guys put together. I know Ron's, I've seen his, Ron King's. 4 waybill system would work. I don't know. I hate computers. I would never use a computer switch list thing. I hate that stuff. But it's just that when only 2 towns and a few things, that 4-cycle thing would just move the same car back and forth, and you'd notice it.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure the same car was moving on my N scale out between the General Motors assembly plant and some staging yard I had back and forth. But there were so many other car movements that you didn't perceive it as moving the same car back and forth.
Right. Yeah, and I agree with you. On a small layout and even on big layouts where you do the swap 2 cars for 2 cars or things like that, it doesn't feel railroady.
No.
And when you have unique deliverables and unique poles and consist in your trains, then it feels more rarity and sort of on demand.
Right. And like I said, it's a shame not to know what's in the car. I mean, I don't know. Somebody needs to know. So that would be me. That's this guy.
Yeah, Pete, I totally agree. I really liked your layout and your whole thought process is great. I find it fascinating. I really like the idea of moving commodities and not just cars. So I think you've done a great job at identifying commodities, where they're going, where they're coming from. To add to what you were talking about with Peter Barney and how cars were probably just left where they were, I can totally see that on the Wiscasset, Waterville, and Farmington. However, on the SR and RL, there's a couple of movies, and one of them has a train going by like a mile-long stretch of pulp racks.
Mhm.
And I'm exaggerating, obviously not a
Sure.
mile, but I think that bigger railroads like the SR and RL did have a dedicated siding where you would find, cars sitting there off season. So
Right.
that's another concept you could think about is storing cars off season, specific cars that are seasonal, storing them
Right.
off season in a specific location, especially from out in the SR and RL.
Yeah. I mean, all these railroads, all five of them, the cars never really left. So they're no per diem. I mean, and I modeled, standard gauge class 1 railroads most of my life. And you're always looking for that mix of foreign road and close by. Well, this is easy. They're all owned by the railroad basically. And so there's got to be a reason to move it. Okay. People aren't going to waste energy moving something. So what I found, and talking to Peter, is that, apparently this boxcars is going to sit there in Palermo until somebody freaking needs it, or it's in the way. But yeah, if you have pulp rack cars that need to be in position when they're needed, or just moved out of the way until they're needed, yeah, I'm sure there's dedicated routes on that.
Pete, I got a more of a question and it's sort of a prototype question, or did a operational question. Do you know, obviously narrow gauge cars carried a lot less material than a standard gauge car. Do you know, like a load of potatoes, would that be shipped as a less than carload lot? Or would they try to load a couple of narrow gauge cars of potatoes into a standard gauge car before it moved?
I don't know. The only research I did is, and a lot of the stuff was what stuff that Chris and Gary had published, and I've read in all the various books that I had to put those in a spreadsheet, by the way, Chris, because I can't keep track of where I read that before, because and where I can go back and refer to it. But I know, like the lumber, there was so many, I forget what it is now, it's been a while, there's so many loads of flat car loads of lumber to fill up one of those schooners. I mean, I've done the math, the cubic area, whatever, to fit in that schooner. So it's quite a bit. So yeah, I would think it'd be like 2 or 3 cars to one. What do you think, Chris? I mean, but I don't worry about them. That main central car hasn't moved ever. So
yeah, no, I was
it's just
out of curiosity how the
Yeah.
I handled it, and obviously with the ship, it did have a lot more capacity than a boxcar. So when you're moving the ship, that might be an opportunity for an extra train where you're moving 3 or 4 cars of lumber, rather than it could be pretty much a solid lumber train that was going to the ship.
And I have one of those extra cards for that, where they're going to run an extra because the shipyard down in on the Kennebec River in around Bath, it needs a shipload of lumber. But it wouldn't be box cores. So
Yeah,
so we're going to make boxes.
So Peach and I'm sorry, Pete. Combine your names. So Pete, in I think it was volume 4 or whatever. We had a freight waybill. Excuse me, concerning a load of hay going to Boston, and it was several cars.
Right.
So I imagine, Jack, it would have to be a situation where they had a customer that wanted typically a large amount of something, and if it's seasonal, you do want to move a large amount all at once. Like I doubt they would do like a LCL of potatoes. I think they would be moving a lot of potatoes all around harvesting time, you
Right.
know, and then a lot of apples all around harvesting time. And a
In
lot
fact,
of,
I think one of your books has a picture showing of those hay cars, the
yeah, the
80s,
hay
50s.
car and the waybill, it was all right there. It was
Yeah,
amazing.
I mean, it looked like they were lined up. I don't have room for that. I mean,
Yeah.
on mine, so I don't, that's why, Jack, not to
Yeah,
blow you
you
up, I
need
just
like
don't
4
have room for it.
cars.
I don't have
Yeah.
room for it. Yeah, I can fit 3 cars on my potato warehouse, but I'm usually storing a car. It's a place to shove a car all the way because I don't have room
Yeah.
to maneuver. So, and when I get to Wiscasset, there is no room at all for anything. So, very
Jack?
tight curves. So,
Hey, Jack,
Yeah.
you know, potato warehouses were businesses, the way I understood it in Maine. The farmers would bring potatoes in and be paid for the load, let's say in September. And the warehouse, the potato business would wait for market prices in Boston, New York to change, to go
like a
up.
grain elevator, Tom. It was
Yeah,
like
that's-
grain elevator.
that's the way grain
It's the
works
exact
in the
same thing.
Midwest.
Right.
Yeah.
The elevator buys, or
Well, you think about
actually,
potatoes are
sometimes
more of
they
a-
hold the grain,
Yeah.
Right.
and the farmer doesn't get paid until the elevator sells it.
Right.
Yeah,
So
and
the-
potatoes are a lot more of a crop that's more susceptible to, rot than corn or
Right.
wheat. So,
Right.
yeah.
But that's why they
I
were,
don't know, you guys mentioned in your books, it sounds like the railroads either had them built or I don't know who owned I'm not clear who owned the potato warehouse.
Yeah.
Was it a co-op of some type?
There's
or
no evidence that they were privately owned. I mean, the Turner Center Dairy Association reefer obviously was privately owned, or they paid to advertise.
Yeah,
But that's, I think, the only one that we kind of know
right.
of a financial link or a business link.
Yeah.
I think they just needed cars to support those industries.
Right.
And so they added a stove, they rebuilt them.
Sure.
I mean, since potatoes were introduced to Maine, and there was this big boom of shipping potatoes, all of a sudden, they rebuilt some cars and made them into potato cars,
Right.
to match the need.
I've been working my late current project, working on caboose 301,
301.
I think it is.
One.
And it is freaking, there's how many changes that it go through? Like 4 major changes and
Yeah.
a bunch of little changes. I don't know. It's like, there was a reason for it. And
Pick an
most of the time it doesn't sound like it was used as a caboose or anything. I don't know. So, yeah, everything was pretty fluid on I know this railroad. I'm sure the Sandy River did a lot of that stuff too. You use what you got, you adapt, you get the carpenters or the blacksmiths together and you in your shop and you make what you need. So it's fascinating. But
My other question is sort of related to the first question is, do you know how they build their shipment? A standard gauge railroad, would bill by weight usually, and they had a provision for weighing the cars. I'm not aware of any car scales on any of the narrow gauges. I just wonder, how they charge for carrying freight. Is it just a flat rate per carload, or?
yeah, I mean, Chris, you and Gary, I think you guys talked about it in one of your books too. But you're right, there was no scales or track scales anywhere.
There's no visible interior ones, but they had to be, because so much was done by weight.
Yeah.
And they did find some very large, I forget the name of the scale, but they found a couple of very large, Stilliard? Is that it?
Mhm.
Stilliard style scales along the banks of Weeks Mills, by where the potato houses were. I think the Albion Historical Society found some of those. Or it could have been for the corn shop. But there are whole pages on commodity tariffs, and so it might actually list the unit on those tariff sheets. But there are books of tariffs that are still, I think one's in Augusta. It lists all the different tariffs, all the different commodities, and how much it costs.
It's by weight. It's by weight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one thing to consider is maybe, I don't know how the potatoes were bagged or boxed.
Or
And
barreled,
Barrels.
what?
barreled also is
Yeah,
possible.
barrels.
Yeah. So they may have been weighed, ahead of time in the smaller commodities and multiplied, because, that might have been all that needed to be done. That might have been sufficient.
Yeah.
Especially if some of that ended up going different places, just in the thought process.
I mean, you just point out another part of this thing. I mean, this railroad is 40 miles long. It lasted less than 40 years or whatever. And there was like all these books and stuff that you guys, that you've written, other people written, and there's still so much we don't know about little things like that. I asked one time when I was building that Turner dairy car, what did it look like on the inside? Where did they were supposed to be able to put ice in there. Then there was an ice house in Albion. Where did the ice go? What did they put the ice in?
Yeah,
And when that guy is loading those cans of milk and cream in there, what is he sitting on? It's just not sitting on the ground, is it? Or on the floor? Isn't it going to roll all over the damn place? Was it racks? I don't know. No one seems to know. So, just that one car, I spent like 9 or 10 months emailing a bunch of folks asking what the hell did it look like inside, and no one seems to know. So,
yeah, and up at the museum, they just
Like a rat
basically guessed.
yeah,
They
the
basically
museum.
guessed that there was like a shallow pan pan at like one end or maybe at
Yeah.
both ends.
Yeah, I
And
don't
it's
know.
got a drain system.
Yeah, so
That's it. They don't know.
so. See, Jack, you can get us into the weeds real quick.
Yeah, but try to be difficult here.
That's okay. No, these are all good questions.
I think a loaded milk can probably would stay upright just because of the weight, unless there was something, a derailment or something. But
Or
the
like
empty
a 40 mile,
cans, they might have had
40
to.
mile rickety trip down, stopping every like 5 miles.
Yeah,
or 2
I
miles,
just know how
I don't
heavy a
know.
milk can is from working on my
Yeah.
own dairy farm, and I think that'd be heavy enough probably to stay upright under normal circumstances. But the empty cans,
Yeah.
they may have had to, have a rope across the car
Yeah,
from
I
side
know.
to side or something to keep the cans from
Sure.
moving around.
Yeah, and those cans had to be sterilized.
Yeah,
That was usually done at
once they
the
left the
creamery
plant.
before
Yeah.
they went back.
right, right.
The
And there
railroad.
was a guy riding in there, right?
Yeah.
So what the hell did he have did he have a bench to sit on? Did he have a desk to work? I don't know. There's
Wooden
the dairy,
box.
I've been in the dairy car up in Wiscasset several times. Not enough to remember anything, but none of that stuff is in there because you've got Peter Barney's display. It's a museum, the Maine
Mhm.
museum.
Sit on a block of ice.
Yeah, sit on a block of ice, okay, except
In
in the
summer.
winter time. You
summer,
don't want
yeah.
to be sitting on that block of ice in January, so it's all good.
This is Bill Offerman. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
You guys, got to see the layout and on the videos and such, but it's a fabulous layout when you go in person. I've had the opportunity to go a couple times to see Pete's layout. It's worth the trip.
Just one final question on the milk trains. Do you only run the milk car in 2 of the 4 trains a day? In other words, loaded down in the morning and back on the afternoon?
from what I can tell, my logic tells me the farmers are gonna get it out the first thing in the morning, so the first train of the day carries the milk train, and the last train brings the empties back in that car and brings it back and puts it on the,
So that gives you extra capacity on the other 2 trains.
Yeah,
One
yeah.
car.
so.
Figured that was probably it.
Yeah, I've kind of worked out, I didn't get into a lot of that detail, but each train does have specific things to do. They go down to the wharf or not. But that's just made up stuff in my mind, just to kind of make sure you have stuff to do rather than just running and switching. It's basically a switching layout is what it is. But I added some other things to kind of make it seem like a real railroad.
Hey, Pete, very nice layout to begin with, but when you were talking about operations, I seem to remember somewhere they were talking about those cars that were stored on sidings. Every once in a while, they would have to hook a locomotive up to it to move them back and forth to keep the wheels greased up. So that would be something for operations.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. But keep in mind, I have 12 cars. They don't sit around very long.
Yeah, you have to worry about it.
My biggest problem is I'll have 8 loads of lumber I need to move. I have 6 flat cars. So then I got a scrounge and I've only got room to park about 4 or 5 of them on the wharf to load them onto so it's space and capacity is the problem. That cars don't sit around on my layout very long.
Just a brief comment about the milk cars. I have a book here called Milk Trains and Traffic by Jeff Wilson. And in that he talks about, there's a picture in one of the earlier cars where they've got big chunks of ice on top of the steel milk cans. And the other thing is a discussion of the cars with the large glass-lined tanks. They did it, he quotes an experiment here where they ran the car like overnight or some such thing. And they didn't have any kind of cooling. It was just pre-cooled. And the temperature only went up 2 degrees in like 24 hours. So depending on the style, it looks like generally they either put ice directly on the cans or they put it in large glass-lined tanks with pre-cooled milk, and they didn't have any particular cooling beyond that at all. That's
I know that part of the world, the New England and in the Midwest, upper Midwest, the milk was a big deal. And very sophisticated as it went on. I can't tell looking at this information that's available in 1920s in Wiscasset area in Sheepscott Valley. They weren't all that sophisticated. I mean, I don't, as I said, there's no documentation of what was in there other than they loaded cans. I mean, Chris and Gary found the names of the 2 employees who lived in a little house up there in Albion, but we don't know what the hell they sat on the way down the 40-mile trip every day. So
Yeah, I think they also had 2 different types. I think they had like a milk can and a cream can.
yeah, there's 2 different sizes, I understand. And like Gary 3D printed some one time ago. I think I picked them up when I was in Timonium years ago.
The cream can is smaller.
Yeah, and then Ed, I see Tim's on it. Ed Fillion, Ed tried some making some. They were a little bit bigger. So I've got 2 different sizes. So
yeah, up at Sheepscott, they actually have an original one with its still with its cork, and the cork is actually a block of turned wood on like a little chain.
Yeah,
just thought you guys like to know that.
yeah.
But they actually have one of the original cream cans. It's really cool.
Right.
I have 2 like rusty ones, and they got this really cool brass plaque soldered on it with the TCDA logo, that intertwined lettering. And it also has like a little label like "Fill here," and there's like one other little label on there. They're pretty neat.
I know.
But
go ahead. On the Sandy River, I know that, just a couple of things that people have been going over. On their milk cars, they just packed them in sawdust. And the milk went from the farm, Flagstop, wherever they were, picking it up at, and went to the creamery, and then they separated the milk into cream and milk there, and then shipped it further. I know there were at least 2 creameries, the one in Kingfield and there was one in Farmington just off the tracks. I think there's 1 or 2 pictures of it. But all of that was done at the creameries. So I don't know that on the Sandy River there would have been separate milk and cream cans, because it would have come raw and then happened at the dairy, at the creameries. And another thing too, as far as weighing cars for commodities, there was at Farmington, there was a narrow gauge scale, and it was over near that one coal building. I can't remember the guy's business name, but it was over in that area. And if I remember right, it was only there for a while, and then they tore it out. So as far as weighing things, that's something, a little bit of input there, maybe.
And Pete,
It did happen, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, Tim.
And Pete, for your
Yeah.
time frame, we had a discussion a couple of meetings ago about what got shipped out of Turner's Dairy, the
Yeah.
creamery. So I did some research back here, and the New England Bob Brown is an expert on milk cars, and he's done a lot of research. He came up with the records that showed out of the Wiscasset creamery, they shipped fresh milk to Rhode Island 3 times a week in the 1920s.
Okay.
So coming into the creamery on the narrow gauge, it wasn't that sophisticated, but they were collecting enough that it was going into one of those glass-lined tank cars, probably, to go all the way to Rhode Island as fresh milk.
Because the standard gauge was on the opposite side of the building.
Yeah.
And the other part, there's not much info that, as you know, about what was going on inside the milk cars. But there is for the Boston milk cars that started in 1881 or something. And there was a fleet of over 100 milk cars coming into Boston. And the clerks inside the milk cars had to test each can of milk to make sure it was not acidic. So they had a job to do inside the car because you didn't want to dump sour milk into the rest of it.
Yeah.
And if it was sour, you didn't put it in, you left it in the car, you brought it back for the farmer to take care of. So they probably did very similar thing because it was all established in the 1880s, 1890s. And then when the milk cars were built, they probably followed the same kind of protocols that you don't want to bring in sour milk into the creamery.
Right.
So they had a job to do in there. They had a desk probably.
Mhm.
They had to keep records of how many cans each farmer sent in. They had to keep collect and drop them off at the right stop on the way back so that the farmers could pick them up the next day.
Yeah, Tom, to add to that, at Sheepscott, they have a couple of milk cans that are that have brass tags with the farmer's name on them.
Right.
That's how the cans got back to the correct location. It actually has their first 2 initials and then their last name stamped into the brass tag.
In a past lifetime, I had to write legislation to regulate Amish milk versus other people's milk in Indiana because the code required that the milk be cooled down to a certain temperature within so many hours. And of course, the Amish didn't want to have power refrigeration. They wanted to use the spring house. And I suspect that spring house was, except in the wintertime, was how you cooled milk down along the Wiscasset. And it's an interesting regulatory process. And as you say, somebody's sitting in that car making sure, at least sniffing the milk to make sure that it hasn't gone off. The can still had some cool temperature. As you said, the Sandy River was using sawdust to insulate the cans in the car. So there's probably, in much the same way that on the SP narrow gauge and the coming out of laws and such, they had fish racks that ice went on to keep fish cold, and they probably had some kind of frame on the floor that the cans could set in and retain ice blocks or whatever. Because if they're dropping the milk in the morning, that means it cooled overnight at the farm. And somebody then loaded it on a wagon and brought it down to the station to get it on the train to get it headed in the right direction. So, but it's
Bill, you bring up regulation, and that makes me think with the Wiscasset, they housed 2 men in Albion. They actually housed them.
Mm-hmm.
Those guys, to spend that money to house them meant they had a job to do. So it wouldn't surprise me if they were regulating, doing testing on the way down.
Yeah, I can't see their only job was to jump out and pick up the cans and throw them into the car. That just seemed kind of, why wouldn't the railroad just do that? Somebody on the rail, but that makes a lot of sense to do.
So like you've got your whistle stop at Prebles that arguably somebody may have brought 10 cans a day or whatever in.
Sure.
So somebody had to step off the car and put it in the car and get it going.
The standard rules across the rest of New England were that the farmer puts it in the car.
The clerk in the car
Farmer's not
puts
gonna
the
sit
empties
around.
on. The clerk puts the empties out in the afternoon, but the rules for everywhere else, because we don't know what the rules were in Wiscasset, is that the farmer has to put the load into the car.
So the farmer had to meet the train.
Had to meet the train, and had to be there and get up on the platform, on the milk platform, to load it onto the car, one farmer at a time if there was more than one.
So God help him if he got up late.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
You know, it's
You'd have to add that to your timetable in a way. You know, you'd have to have sufficient time for loading and unloading as well.
Well, I know it, if you look at that schedule, it was, the first train of the day, left at 6 a.m. Supposed to arrive, scheduled to arrive at 9 a.m. It's 40 miles to go, 3 hours to go 40 miles. So there was a lot of stopping, and 'cause the trains weren't that slow, but yeah, there was a lot of stopping and waiting. So, anyway, it's,
There was a comment in the WW&F museum newsletter, I don't know, 2 or 3 editions back, quoting a wreck that they had where the engine went off the tracks right over into a ditch or into a small stream. And the comment in the newspaper was that somebody on the train said we were going really fast, probably 9 or 10 miles an hour.
Yeah.
I think it was a Mason, wasn't it the Mason car wreck or something, Mason wreck?
Right.
Yeah, so.
When I was in college, I had the opportunity to ride the Belfast to Moosehead Lake from Belfast to Burnham Junction and back, which is 44 miles one way. The trip took us 12 hours.
Oh my gosh.
But there was also high speed running too, because across China Bog they're apparently doing a mile a minute in the number
Yeah.
7. So
Really?
Yeah, they could go fast. So
yeah, they could.
it scared the hell out of everybody because there's so much overhang, you know.
Yeah, if you watch most of the 2-foot movies, at least for the SR and RL, they were not going slow. You know,
No.
yeah, old-fashioned movies are a little fast, but they were not going slow.
Well, keep in mind that was much later. This story was in the 1890s, I think.
Oh yeah, was it the PNR or the Sandy River F&M or something?
No, it was
It was the Mason
WW&F.
wreck or whatever.
Okay,
It was
yeah.
I think it was the Mason wreck was
Mhm.
that I was talking about. So
Pete, how many carloads did you calculate to fill up a schooner?
I can't remember. It's been a while, Tim, but I did it originally based on cubic area because they didn't care about weight. You look at these coasters with lumber, they were loaded down
Yeah.
almost to the gunnels, and they had it outboarded out beyond that. So basically, this wooden ship full of wood wasn't going to sink. It just wasn't going to go very fast.
Yeah.
So I have to look that up again. It's been a
There was
while.
there was some West Coast information I got. They talked about loading their schooner. It took 12 standard gauge freight cars of lumber, and it took them 3 to 4 days to load it. So
Yeah. And most of the schooners are a lot bigger than mine because
Yes.
of the space. Mine's a 2-masted schooner. Most of them are 4, 5, 6-masted schooners that they could hold a whole city. So yeah,
yes,
those are big, slow-moving sailing freighters, is all those
Yes.
were. But yeah, I didn't have. I searched hard and wide to find a set of plans that would fit into my space. So,
I happen to
Yeah.
know I'm getting the Smuggler for Christmas.
oh, good for you.
The same one you built. Yes.
Yes, yes. So,
We still on milk cans?
sure.
How many milk
Yeah, yeah.
cans? How many milk cans can you get into the Sandy River milk car?
He's showing us a picture.
There you
An unpublished photo of Whitefield. And if you look real close, all the cans are sort of separated. Right? This
Mhm.
can here is completely different from these cans. So that should kind of answer some of,
Different in position, you mean? It's separated but by space, or it looks darker, but it could be in the shadows.
like 8 here and then
Yeah,
there's
yeah, yeah.
one here, and then this
Yeah.
guy's sitting on his own can here.
Right. So
Typically and otherwise.
literally.
So Tim was probably right. They probably did wait. So,
There's a lot of milk cans there.
oh yeah, it was a big deal. That's why I felt, Gary, I needed to include it and highlight it enough in my operating scheme, because lumber, I mean, this thing was about moving lumber and moving, the steady stuff was milk. I mean, every day you got to pick up the milk. You may not have a load of lumber today, but you're always going to have to pick up the milk. And the mail, those are the mail and the milk, every day. So.
Yeah, and I remember our conversation a couple of Zooms back. We were talking about milk cars on the SR and RL. And as I'm flipping through the pictures, whatever, there's like a great shot of a bunch of milk, because we were saying how many pictures are there of milk cans on platforms on the SR and RL, and there's just not that many. The two that I've noticed are one at Strong around the turn of the century towards like the railroad north end. And then there's another picture in Strong of milk cans. It's in the wintertime. It's that picture where there's just all ice all over the platform, and there's milk cans on the south railroad south end of the Strong station, which is weird because the creamery was within walking distance of the station. Why were the cans? Was that like the return cans?
No, they were probably the can. Well, when was the creamery built? Wasn't it built late?
The creamery, I don't know.
Because most of it went to Farmington, to the dairy there, to the creamery there.
So maybe the early picture. So these were both early pictures. So maybe it just predates the creamery and Strong.
Yeah, Chris, I've also seen photos of milk cans on the platform at the Albion station, and you've also got a milk ramp in Albion.
Yeah.
How far away is it? Not that far away. And why would you have two places? I don't know, but whatever. There was a reason for some farmer probably didn't want to get off of Benton Road and he wanted to wait there at the station and not go around the corner. I don't know. There's a reason for everything. But,
chocolate milk.
Chocolate milk, yeah.
Well, the Strong and Farmington deals would depend on who paid best.
Right.
Well, sure. But I think, as I read mostly Jerry's books, that the creamery was later and that the majority of the milk through the years went to Farmington. And then when the creamery opened in Strong, the local farmers could go there and they would do the same process. And who knows, I can't remember seeing anything about what the Strong creamery was doing. Were they loading cars to go to the creamery in Farmington?
No.
Yeah, I don't know what the
Or
Strong
just serving
creamery was
local
for.
industry.
Like, it's not a very big building. If there weren't, preparing raw milk into pasteurized milk, I'm wondering if they're just making cheese or something, perhaps butter out of the cream.
That could very well be, because you're right, it isn't a very big building.
Yeah, I can't see you building operations to process milk into purified milk, whatever, pasteurization or modification, whatever they were doing on a small scale.
Thinking about it, does the Turner Center dairy car, is there a floor drain anywhere in that car that anybody has noticed?
We've asked, and I haven't seen any documentation. So
okay, I just was thinking of if there was a water pan that would collect the water and drain it.
That's what the museum put one in.
Yeah.
Just out of a hypothesis.
Right.
It makes sense. But
my problem was solved, Chris, when I couldn't get the doors to operate properly and I closed them. So now I really don't care what it looks like inside from a modeling standpoint. When I wanted the doors to open, I had hinges, operating hinges, but I couldn't get them to close properly. I wanted to know what it looked like inside. That's why I've been asking Tom, you've seen my million questions about this caboose, because, what did it look like inside caboose 301 in 1925? So I'm just guessing at this point. So.
Well, the Lionel had no problem getting the milk in and out of that car.
Exactly.
Used to shoot them right across the platform.
Exactly. They didn't care if it's about spillage, so.
Just to follow up on the Strong Creamery, it was built in 1915, according to Davos' book number 6.
Okay. So they certainly were doing business till the railroad closed.
Probably. I mean, the building
20
lasted.
years.
But Chris's may reference predate that creamery,
Yeah.
probably.
Yeah.
And it makes sense that there would have been cans on the Strong depot.
Yeah, and it's not a very big building. It looks big in the pictures, but it's not that big on the inside. It really isn't. It's one story, and like Stephen was saying, you know, that there's just not really a whole lot of room for all the pipes and the heating and the pasteurization, and you know that would be a huge process. You know, you really couldn't do that in that small building.
I think all they did in Strong was collect it and put it in the cars. I don't think they did anything more than that.
So in other words, they were just a distributor. The farmers would drop it off there.
Yeah. Did they get deliveries or did they ship? What? I thought they got deliveries to the creamery.
I don't think so.
Delivery other than empty cans?
And Jack, you said you've done this before, of dairy farm stuff? Isn't there a time sensitive thing to this?
Well, I know there's a very good book about milk operations on the New York, Ontario, and Western, and the creameries did vary in size, but you know you had to have the capacity to cool the milk when it came in, which is usually a water-filled tank, and you had to have the capacity to treat the milk. You know, the farmers' cans would come in and they would be dumped into the system that you know, did the pasteurization or whatever, and then there was a separate area of the building that the farmers' cans would go over and be steam cleaned, and then they had to either go outside on a platform or be stored inside until the farmer came and picked them up. So, you know, there were a reasonable amount of space requirements, even in a small operation.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking, Jack. I can't see the railroad delivering raw milk to a location and then turn around and ship it out to another location to be processed. That seems very inefficient. And
yeah, I would suspect the farmers brought the milk directly to the Strong Creamery, and then the creamery would ship it out. If it wasn't pasteurized in Strong, they would ship it to a larger creamery in Farmington or whatever to be processed.
I think one thing is that
correct.
the Strong Creamery could have just been serving local clients.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I got Jerry Delvos' book out, and for the Strong album or Strong volume, page 129, New England Creamery was built in 1915, and it says prior to 1915, milk was separated on the farm with cream sent in cans for processing in Farmington or elsewhere. On April 15th, 1915, the Phillips newspaper reported construction of a creamery in Strong. The work has begun on the new creamery. It is in charge of Mr. Hall of Wisconsin, building, yada, yada, yada. No mention of who actually owned it. But we know when the creamery was built and what they did before the creamery was built. And let's see if there's anything else that says it's pertinent.
So they were just taking cream. They weren't taking milk. The farmer separated it before they shipped it.
And
So
that's when it went to Farmington. The farmers separated themselves and then sent it on to Farmington. It doesn't say what the I'm assuming since it talks about they separated themselves before the creamery was there. After the creamery is there, they wouldn't have had to separate it themselves, I guess.
No, but it's called a creamery, so they were just collecting cream.
You would think.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm just reading what's there.
Yeah. could be
I'm not a
semantics.
dairy expert,
No,
so
I'm not either.
Yeah, here's that.
I like
Here's
it.
one of those pictures I was talking about.
Yeah.
This is with that intermediate lettering style for SR and RL. So
Yeah.
it's like turn of the century. They got milk cans right there, and I don't see the creamery back there. So that's pre 1915.
Yeah.
This is in volume 1, I think. Yeah, volume 1. This is a Eastern illustration postcard. It's been in other books, but it's not cropped. It's not cropped here, so it shows a lot more. But that's one of the few examples of milk cans at an SR and RL platform. They just don't appear that much in pictures.
Chris, you have cream cans?
Yeah, so yeah, I have 2 of them. They're really rusted.
How tall are they?
Oh, they're foot and a half.
That's helpful, right, Stephen? That's
Foot and a
helpful.
half, you know.
Yeah.
One hand.
Yeah,
they're small.
They're not that big. They
Yeah.
really aren't that big.
Well, cream would be heavier, right? I would think.
Yeah.
And not as much of it.
So on the Sandy River, farmers were producing on the farm milk and cream.
Yes,
Yes.
but they're probably shipping cream and feeding the milk to pigs or calves or whatever.
Right, or farm use, right,
Yeah.
local. Got it.
That's what my uncles did in the 40s and 50s. They separate. I remember separating milk, drinking raw milk at Christmas time was just a pleasure. And they would sell the cream to a place nearby, and they fed the milk to animals.
I wonder if it was
Hi,
goats.
my name is Steve Pronovo, and I have researched milk in Maine very extensively, and have published information with the Boston Maine Railroad Historical Society and the 470 Railroad Club.
and you're just now speaking up?
Uh, yeah.
And you're just now speaking
Well,
up?
He was waiting for us to get everything wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
you guys were going astray there. The creamery in Farmington sent its milk to Boston. So and I was not aware of the milk traffic on Sandy River and Rangy Lakes when I was doing my research, but I do know that the Farmington creamery sent to Boston, and it was originally a Turner Century creamery, and then it became an H.P. Hood creamery. In Wiscasset, the milk there was turned partly into ice cream mix, where that's part of what the process was. And the ice cream mix would be shipped in the cream cans, but also the milk would also still go to Boston also. And Wiscasset did not ever ship in tank cars. They only shipped cans on the Maine Central in the outside braced Maine Central box cars. Once the Wiscasset, Waterville, and Farmington went out of business, most of that milk from that area probably went up to Unity, where there was a Turner Century and H.P. Hood creameries there. But the word creamery doesn't just mean cream. It doesn't necessarily mean processing. The term was used very generally. It could be a collection point, and it would be called a creamery. It could be a processing plant where milk was actually pasteurized or bottled. So, you can't say, well, it's a creamery, so therefore they just did cream. Some of them were just collection points.
Do you know that the ice cream you said was a mix?
Yes.
That mean it was like a slurry, but not frozen.
Right. It would be sent in cans, and they would add eggs and sugar to the mix whether whether it would be mixed in Wiscasset. Although Wiscasset is credited with making Eskimo pies, so apparently the Turner Center Creamery made ice cream at that facility in Wiscasset.
Do you know if
If
they
you look-
shipped ice cream, frozen ice cream?
I never found any evidence that they did. I know they sent ice cream mix, and I know they sent milk from
okay.
Wiscasset to Boston from
Right.
that creamery.
In some of the materials we went through, that building immediately south of the TCDA building was called the Ice Cream Factory.
Yes.
That's how it was labeled. I think it was on the maps. But yeah,
Saw
so,
that too.
and then later on, that whole cluster of buildings was bought by Wiscasset Grain Company or Wiscasset Lumber Company, whatever.
Well,
Was
that
Turner
the
a co-
Wiscasset plant never made it into the HP Hood network, and almost all the other Turner Center creameries did wind up being purchased by Hood. But that when Hood bought out Turner Century in 1930 or thereabouts, there's no mention of Wiscasset then.
was Turner Center as an organization, was it a co-op of the local farmers, or was it in fact a standalone company?
It was a standalone company. It was not a co-op. You mentioned New England Creamery in Strong, and that was a co-op.
You can't see him.
Yeah.
Oh, there he is.
I used to travel to Maine to visit my brother in Unity, and that building was up as Turner Center when I first started going up there in the early 70s. Now I think it's still there, but it's something else.
It would be HP Hood now because Turner Center was bought out. All of its facilities were bought out by HP Hood around 1932.
Okay.
And sometimes names don't change. I know I see that around here. a lot.
Well, actually, this building, I don't know if it was off Route 6, but it went from Unity to Troy, which is where my brother lived. And you could still see the Turner markings on the.
Oh yeah, the logo,
Oh, yeah.
the Turner Center logo stayed on some of the buildings, but
Yeah.
but they were
Right.
owned by HP Hood.
So did
You're
they?
right, Chris. We spent a lot of time going off on a tangent here. We had the guy who had the series here, so appreciate it. You said it was Steve?
Yes.
He will reference several books. First of all is a series of a 5-volume series called Narrow Gauge in the Sheepscot Valley. These were written by Gary Kohler, Chris McChesney, and Jerry Davos. Gary and Chris attend the presentation and make a few comments later on. So this is the 5-book set. Second, he references a Peter Barney book. This is long out of print at this time, but it was about the operations on the other 2-footers, meaning not the Sandy River and Rangeley Lakes. He has a separate book about the Sandy River and Rangeley Lakes, but the WW&F is included in this one, along with a couple of other Maine 2-foot railroads. And another book he references is 2 Feet to Tidewater by Robert Jones. This is an excellent book for basic history.